If we look at this question, 3x plus 5 equals 11, I've asked you to write a proof. Okay, so this was your warm-up today. So you were asked to write a proof. So we have 3x plus 5 equals 11. This is your given. You can't do anything. The only reason you have that is because this was given. Okay, your next step, remember our whole idea is to get x by itself. So what we're going to do is you would subtract 5 from each side. So when you subtract the same amount from each side of your equal sign, the property that we're using is called the subtraction property of equality. So you would write subtraction property of equality. And typically we would be fine if you just went ahead and did this step, but because we're writing a proof, we want you to tell us every single step that you're using. Okay, so the next step would be to simplify. And if we look at the right side of our equation, we have, sorry about that, we have 3x plus 5 minus 5 equals 6. Okay, so all I did was I simplified that particular side. Now the reason I didn't go ahead and do 5 minus 5 here is because this is a different property. Okay, if I say 3x plus 0 equals 6, then you can see that I said 5 minus 5 equals 0. And the property that enables us to say this is not simplification, but it's the additive inverse. Now remember, the additive inverse property is when we add opposite numbers, we get a 0. So the inverse properties are where you get a 0 or a 1 if we're talking about multiplication. Okay, but because we're adding 5 minus 5, or that would be the same as 5 plus a negative 5, we get a 0. Okay, so our next step would be to it would be to say 3x plus 0 equals 6. So when we're adding 0 to each side, that's using the additive identity property. So 3x plus 0 is simply 3x, and that's the additive identity property. Okay, and now the next step would be to divide both sides by 3. So when we're dividing both sides of the equation by the same number, we know that's called the division property of equality. So the division property of equality allows us to say that if we divide both sides of the equation by the same non-zero number, that we end up with x equals 2. And then that would be our final proof. I know that you could have just subtracted each side by 5, and you would have used the subtraction property of equality, and then you could go straight from there to the division. But in order to be a level 3 on this particular proof, or on this particular standard, we want you to give us more than just a couple of steps. So we need you to talk about why you're able to do what you can do. And that would involve using the inverse and identity properties. Now you can use your graphic organizer on your quizzes. We don't expect you to memorize all of the properties. We just expect you to understand how to use them. Okay? Have a nice day, guys.